Welcome to Rotoviz Radio. You are listening to episode 48. My name is John Moore, and with me is Matt Friedman. Matt, how's it going?
It's going well, John. The 48th episode, the Stephen Davis episode. Stephen Davis was such a beast. John, do you know much about him?
I would like to know more, Matt, so please tell me.
Okay, so for his first 3 NFL years, he did almost nothing after being drafted in the 4th round. And then in his 4th year, he had a huge breakout. He was a top 3 running back. And then basically for the next half decade, he was a top 20 caliber running back with some more production with top 10 seasons. I think there's a lesson here. Basically, when it comes to 230-pound running backs from the SEC who were studs in the SEC, you should probably be patient. So Trent Richardson, there's some hope for you yet. Just joking. There's no hope for Trent Richardson. But getting back to the show, we'd like to thank our guests from last week, Ryan McDowell and Dr. Jeff Budoff. They were fantastic. And of course, we would like to thank the listeners. This job would not be nearly as much fun if we didn't have people listening. So listeners, we salute you. Shaw Wing.
And speaking of listeners of the podcast, Matt, last week we announced a raffle for a free Rotoviz subscription. The way to get entered was to leave a review on iTunes of the podcast and just attach your Twitter handle to it so that we could follow up with you later. We had 9 people in the last week leave us a review on iTunes. And Matt, I need you to pick a number, 1 through 9, and we will figure out who gets a free year of Rotoviz access.
Number 7.
Number 7, we've got Jesse Sidhu. So Jesse, if you're listening, hit us up, rotovizradio@gmail.com, and we will get you hooked up with a subscription. If you are interested in possibly winning a subscription, all you need to do is head over to iTunes, leave a review, attach your Twitter handle, or some way we can get in touch with you on the end of that. We will continue to raffle off free Rotoviz subscriptions throughout the off season. So head on over to iTunes and get entered. So Matt, transitioning to this episode, we've got a fantastic guest. Up first, we're with Emory Hunt talking about small school prospects and really his overall process for evaluating talent for the NFL draft. It's a really fantastic segment. And then later, Matt and I are going to do a full-blown review of the combine. It will be a lot of fun. Looking forward to that. But before we get to the episode, Matt, do you have anything from the last week in the football world that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I love how all of these obvious releases are happening. So Ted Ginn gets released from his team and it's news. And Chris Johnson and James Casey, they get released and it's news. So if you look at Roto World, on a player blurb, Maurice Jones-Drew, it says, unless Maurice Jones-Drew takes a pay cut, it's unlikely he'll be back with the Raiders next season. And it's well, yeah, obviously Maurice Jones-Drew is going to get cut. I mean, he should get cut from, well, I wouldn't say existence, but yes, he should no longer be in the NFL. So it strikes me as humorous. Each year at this time, you see these obvious player cuts and it's news. So I guess the news item, the ironic news item for me is MJD might get cut from the Raiders.
Wow. It's funny that you mentioned him specifically because the other day I was looking through my running back database and I saw his name and I literally, I could not think of where he played in 2014. And I was thinking to myself, imagine if I was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and my $1 million question was which team did Maurice Jones-Drew play for in 2014? I think I probably would have guessed the Raiders, but the fact that he has so quickly faded into oblivion is quite sad.
That would have been a trick question because he didn't actually play.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Matt, the one thing that I want to point out, and this comes from the Twitterverse from Dane Brugler, who you can find on Twitter at DPBrugler. He had a tweet from last night that said, or a pair of tweets. I leave Indianapolis with information overload, a lot of great tidbits that I'll share, but the one lasting thought from the 2015 NFL Combine is that I couldn't find one person I trust, NFL scout, analyst, etc., who doesn't think Jameis Winston will be the number one overall pick on April 30th. And I feel like that has kind of, I don't know, it's been an outcome, but I'm not sure that anyone has maybe wanted to acknowledge it or has settled on that. But, from a source like him to make a statement like that, I think is pretty telling. And ultimately, I really hope that that happens for the sake of Mike Evans and Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Those are two guys who were probably the best wide receiver and best tight end, in my opinion, in last year's draft. And for them to get a quarterback that they can actually have successful careers with, please happen.
Yeah, it'll be interesting all throughout the summer. Even after the draft, there will be debates about whether that was the right call or not. I'm more of a Mariota guy, but of course, like I'm not a film scout, and I feel like quarterback is the one position where it really helps to have guys who look at film and can talk about what a quarterback is doing back there. I have no idea if that would be the right call or not. So, we'll have to see, and in 10 years we'll know.
Matt, are we still gonna be doing the podcast in a decade?
2 decades.
We're not going anywhere. All right, so with that, where we will go is to the episode. Up first, we've got Emory Hunt from Football Game Plan to talk about his process for evaluating talent, and he goes real deep, touches on all sorts of prospects and his evaluation methods. And then Matt and I will get into the NFL Combine, results that stood out to us, and their implications moving forward. So let's get to it. Please welcome to the show Emory Hunt, who you can find on Twitter at FBallGamePlan. He's the CEO and founder and analyst at Football Game Plan. He was a college running back at Louisiana Lafayette, as well as being a motivational speaker and author. Emory, how are you?
I'm doing fine, guys. I appreciate you taking time to have me on.
And we appreciate you joining us. So getting right into it, the Combine is wrapped up now. And I'm wondering, what were some of the performances that caught your attention?
Well, truth be told, I'm not a big combine guy because I'm one of those old school, you always trust what you see on the film. But as far as the combine is concerned, I was shocked at the amount of 4.8s coming from the running back position. It just amazed me that you now have defensive ends that are much faster than tailbacks, which is unheard of and something I thought I would never see. Coming from the combine, I never thought I would see guys not running consistent 4.4s or guys that were big time starters at Power 5 conferences running 4.8s while defensive ends are running 4.5s, 4.4s. It was just mind blowing.
Indeed, yeah, and I almost wonder if that doesn't have to do with the devaluation of the position. Maybe the best athletes are getting plugged elsewhere earlier in their careers. And so, but, even that seems like an extreme drop off there. But switching gears and focusing on your site, Football Game Plan, you guys cover all levels of college football, even down to the junior college ranks. In your evaluations, do you make any kind of adjustment for level of competition? How do you compare a guy who was maybe D2 with a guy who played in a Power 5 conference?
Well, I tend to focus on the traits, and to me, traits are what translate, to the next level. And you focus mostly on technique. Is a guy playing with great technique? Is he playing his best consistently? Because you have guys even at a Power 5 conference that are not playing their best football consistently, and that's what makes a pro, in my opinion. You have to play your best, your highest level each and every down and each and every play. Each and every game. And that's what I look for more so than who they're playing. Can you throw the football? Can you get up in your kick slide pretty efficiently and effectively on a consistent basis? Are you catching the football with your hands? That doesn't matter if you're playing at Hampton, Sydney, or playing at Fresno State. If you can't catch a ball in D3, you won't catch a ball anywhere. So those things I focus on more so than who the team are that they're playing.
Emory, that makes a lot of sense to me. When you're evaluating a prospect, I'm wondering if you normally judge him based on his final college season, or do you also evaluate his earlier seasons to kind of see how he's progressed throughout his college career?
That's a great question because we're probably so unique over here at Football Game Plan, the fact that we do break down high school kids. So we are very familiar with a lot of these guys already. So the good part is I tend to go back to their high school for certain positions like linebacker, running back, um, offensive line, defensive line, to see the progression as far as technique is concerned, because those things change dramatically as you move up in levels or as you get older. So I just wanted to see those things. So some guys, some positions, I go all the way back to high school. Other guys, I tend to look at what they did as a sophomore, and you see the progression, because we start taking notes on guys as far as NFL prospects are concerned. As you know, once they reach their sophomore season or redshirt freshman season, we really start evaluating those guys moving forward. So again, for some positions, we go back to high school, but for everyone else, we wait till about their sophomore year to start compiling notes.
Emory, I'm curious, in terms of the skill positions, quarterback or running back or wide receiver, uh, where's the line in terms of kind of going back? How far back do you go? And like, what years do you think are particularly relevant to those positions?
Most importantly, your last 2 seasons, because that's when you have a full grasp, coach permitted, of the offense that you're running or defense that you're running. You have a physical idea of what's expected at the collegiate level, because your body has now become very mature as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old. So I look at your last 2 seasons, because you get a lot of that physically and also mentally from a player.
Makes sense. And are there particular types of small school prospects that you think project to the NFL better than others? So, for instance, speed players versus power players, or skill position players versus linemen?
I would say the skill players, whether it be, wide receivers, running backs, even cornerbacks and safeties, they translate better, because when you look at the guys coming from the offensive line, defensive line, let's take Ali Marpet out of Division III Hobart. He was a left tackle in college. He's not going to play left tackle as a pro. So you have to say, okay, this guy, does he have the guard technique? Because playing guard is a different position than playing tackle. You just can't move down inside and think you're going to be good. So you look at his technique and his footwork, and you look at him a little bit differently because of the size difference as you move up in levels.
We're talking with Emory Hunt, who you can find on Twitter at FBallGamePlan. So transitioning into some specific player-based conversations, Matt and I are big fans of a few small school running backs, and we'd be curious to hear your take on them. Those would be David Johnson, Gus Johnson, Zach Zenner, Tyler Varga, John Crockett, and Terrell Watson. Of that cohort, who stands out to you, and can you share some of your thoughts on those players?
I think Tyler Varga stands out to me the most, and you could also mention Zach Zenner, but I'll touch on Varga more specifically, because what he brings to the table, he's a very good, accomplished runner. He has good all-around skills. His footwork is where it needs to be. His vision is where it needs to be. He's a guy that can run tough in between the tackles and also has enough burst to break off your 20 to 25-yard runs, because you don't really need that long speed. Football is a game of short area bursts. Can you win within a 10-yard frame? Can you win within a 20-yard frame? And I think Varga can definitely do that. And I got the chance to see not only Varga live, but John Crockett live this year, as well as Zach Zenner and David Johnson. I got the chance to see all of those guys live in action this season. And with Zenner and Varga, you hope they don't get what I like to call the white running back stereotype. And you see it already. They're trying to move those guys to fullback, which is doing them a total disservice. For Zach Zenner, you rush for 2,000 yards 3 straight seasons, and you're going to tell me he's a fullback? No, I want that guy with the football in his hands. And with David Johnson, him coming into Northern Iowa as a receiver, being moved to running back, that tells you all you need to know about his ability to not only run routes, but also catch the football, and that makes him a threat as a running back.
Emory, a quick follow-up question. You mentioned David Johnson's skill as a receiver. All of these running backs that we mentioned are, in general, pretty big guys. I think all of them are over 215 pounds. How important do you think it is for a bigger running back also to be able to receive the ball out of the backfield?
Well, you think back to the old 49ers, right, with Bill Walsh and those guys in the 80s and 90s. Everyone in their base offense was a threat. So when you look at their tailback, Roger Craig, one of the best receiving backs, if not the best in history. Ricky Waters followed him up with a guy that can catch the football as well, played a little receiver at Notre Dame. Even Tom Rathman was a guy that can catch the football and also run. So the more you can do, the more dangerous your offense becomes. And you don't have to get out of your base personnel, which means defensively, they're going to stay in their base personnel, which says, hey, my running back can beat your linebacker each and every down if we want to throw the football. My fullback can beat your linebacker each and every down catching the football if we want to throw it to him. So you're at an advantage offensively if your tailbacks can catch the ball.
Certainly. And just to follow up on David Johnson, I'm trying to do a write-up on him. And for his college career, he has about 1,700 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns, which is basically the same thing that Sammy Coates did in his college career at Auburn. So I just was totally blown away by that. And, the visuals on, how he looks on tape. I think the Iowa game is the one I saw over at Draft Breakdown. Pretty spectacular stuff. So kind of flipping the equation the other way, there are a few running backs in this draft who started their careers at Power 5 schools and then ultimately transferred down in the ranks. So Vendrick Mark, Marcus Coker, Joe Bergeron. Do you have any thoughts on that trio? And what do you think of players who leave FBS schools and ultimately go play at a lower level? Do you have any kind of knock on those guys?
I don't necessarily have a knock because I've seen it before on my own team when I was in college. Guys, not happy with playing time, transferring out, going to get playing time. So I totally respect that. Just go play somewhere, because if you're not going to put tape out there at the school you're currently at, you might as well go play somewhere where you're going to put film out in the scout to get to see you play. So that's important. But out that trio, I think Vendrick Mark was the one that surprised me because he was having a lot of success at Northwestern. And I was shocked that he went and transferred down. I still don't understand that move and what caused that one, but he has good skill set. I think he has a chance out of the three to make it as a pro because he does give you a little bit more in the return game from a kickoff return standpoint, which tells you he can play special teams. The other two, not so much. It may be Bergeron, but yeah, for the most part, I'll take Mark over Bergeron because of Bergeron's off-the-field stuff that was well documented.
Transitioning to the wide receivers, last year, two small school wide receivers did very well at the combine, and they were drafted. John Brown in the 3rd round, Jeff Janis in the 7th round. This year, Trey McBride from William and Mary showed great athleticism at the combine. He's had some production in his college career. What are your thoughts on him?
He reminds me a lot of Greg Jennings that plays for the Minnesota Vikings. He's a smooth route runner. He catches everything thrown his way. He doesn't waste movements getting in and out of his break. And he put on a show down at the East-West Shrine game. And you saw him all season long in the CAA, which is a very tough conference. There's another guy that you should keep an eye on, and Adrian Coxon out of Stony Brook, another guy that he transferred from Syracuse, but a player in the CAA that played tremendous football. And I think McBride might be, if I were picking, I would take him easily 2nd, 3rd round because of what he brings to the table from a pure receiving standpoint.
Hey, Emory, I've actually got a follow-up on wide receivers about a specific guy. I'm not sure if you would know him. His name's Rasheed Bailey out of Delaware Valley. Do you know that name, and do you have any thoughts on him?
Yeah, when you look at his quarterback, Aaron Wilmer, Austin Wilmer, I believe his name is, and this is a guy at 5'10", 200 pounds. You instantly want to compare him to Russell Wilson, but that's not his game. I think he's more of a Kevin Glenn guy that plays in the CFL, but Bailey was his number one receiver. And so he caught everything, again, thrown his way. He may not be as explosive. He may not be your quick-footed type receiver, but as far as pure hands is concerned, I think he can catch the football very well. And I think by him not being as fast or not being as quick or sudden, you don't want him on the outside. So I think if he is going to stick as a pro, he's going to have to play inside in the slot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually just had a write-up on him over at Rotoviz and was really blown away by his production. But one thing I'm curious about, and this kind of ties back into the numbers versus, which is, more Matt and I's approach. A guy like Rasheed Bailey is someone I come across because, he has certain metrics on field that pop out to me. How do you come across guys, and how do you stay in tune to everyone that you're supposed to be paying attention to, or might possibly want to pay attention to? Is it through word of mouth, through your relationships in the industry, or how do you go about doing that? I'm just trying to grasp, like, how do you get your arms around the number of players that are out there?
Well, number one, I watch a lot of football. And, this year alone, I went to 30 live games. So I'm at games taking notes, and I'm catching up on the way back on games that I didn't see. And I get film from coaches throughout the course of the week. So I'm constantly watching film. And so you get a good idea of what coaches run. I love learning scheme, a team scheme, because you then know how guys are being utilized. So that way it helps you out as far as projecting what they can or can't do. So that's the one thing. And then when you look at, let's say for instance, I was at Rowan this year. Rowan played William Patterson. It was a D3 game, and I was scouting the running back Whitler Merslin, a talented tailback, and the guy that just kept jumping out was their freshman offensive tackle. One, because he was 6'9", 350 pounds. And you wonder how a guy 6'9", 350 ends up at Rowan, a Division III school, but he was just standing out because he was naturally bigger than everyone, clearing a lot of holes. And I was just amazed. So you make a note of him, and then you follow up with him later on in the week or maybe next year because he was a freshman. So that's how it happens usually. I just recently put out a video with the Fordham 4, and I saw Fordham three times in the last 2 years live. And the one guy that kept standing out was their slot receiver, Brian Wetzel. And not because he was doing a lot of damage underneath, which is obviously what he was doing, but from a versatility standpoint, this guy was also the holder on extra points and field goals. He returned kicks. He returned punts. He also played in the backfield a little bit at times, and he also played inside and on the outside. So I was just impressed with him. And lo and behold, the following season, which was this year, he put it all together and put together an impressive campaign. So you tend to go watch some guys, and other guys tend to stand out as well. You make notes, and you go back and follow up.
Emory, fantastic stuff. It's really great to learn about your process. I have a question kind of going off the script here about another small school receiver who was at the combine, Des Lewis from Central Arkansas, bigger wide receiver. What are your thoughts on him?
I like Des Lewis. Lewis had a fabulous week down at the Senior Bowl this year. He's a big physical guy, and he plays in a very tough FCS conference. The Southland Conference put 4 teams in the FCS playoffs. Could have put 5 in there if McNeese State would have pulled out the victory at the last week of the season. But very good competition down there, especially on the corners. And he was winning consistently at the Senior Bowl, getting off the line of scrimmage with different techniques. He was using quickness. He used power. He used subtle moves as far as like dipping your shoulder, getting into your stem, and then exploding out of your break. And he caught everything with his hands away from his body. So not only is he a guy that's 6'4", 215, but he plays 6'4", 215, which is what you want to see. You don't want to see a guy that's that height playing like he's 5'8", So, and he did a good job all week long, and I was impressed with his skill set, and it matched up what I saw on film, what he did live.
So one thing I'm wondering about, and this is maybe a little bit of a hot button just because of the conduct issues we've seen at the NFL, I'm wondering how much you take into account the off-the-field factors for a player, whether that's behavioral, whether that's ability to learn and, adapt to the schemes. What thoughts do you have in that space?
I don't put any stock in it, tell you the truth, because if I'm not around the guy 24/7, I can't judge his character. And someone may get arrested. Let's say, for instance, we all go out tonight and we all get parking tickets or all get traffic tickets. And even though we weren't speeding, people may just look at, hey, these guys are speeding, got traffic tickets, they're knuckleheads. So you don't know what could possibly be a reason for someone getting, stopped or harassed. You don't know the whole entire situation. Someone could have just had a bad day, and now you're going to flag this guy for his entire career. So unless I'm around those guys constantly, I can't speak on what they can, what their character is. So I tend to stay away from that because that's a real touchy subject.
Mm-hmm. So then I guess the player that's most applicable to in this draft, I'd just be curious for your on-field evaluation, would be Dorial Green Beckham.
Yeah, well, here's the thing with Beckham. I don't see him being the top 5 talent that everyone is talking about because number one, saw him in high school. He was the number one recruit. And in high school, you could tell, okay, he was bigger, stronger, faster than everybody. I get that. But to come into Missouri where he was going to play right away, he couldn't get on the field consistently, which tells you his adjustment time to the college game. I get that as well. But on the field, once he got on, he was dropping passes. Then the following year, he still was dropping passes, not getting open, not creating separation. And then not this past season, but 2013, you start to see in certain games, the light was starting to come on. He was starting to put it together and playing his size as far as in the red zone, being a big time target, which was great. That's what you wanted to see from him 2 seasons ago as a freshman. The problem is he gets kicked off the team and now he doesn't play for 2014. So you don't know if he was able to build on the success he finished the season with in 2013. And that's the biggest question mark. But on the field talent, I saw a second round type prospect, a guy that excels at deep routes, your 7 routes, your 8s and your 9s. But the stuff underneath, your drags, your slants, your speed outs, your in routes, he has problems with those. So I think that he's going to have that right there is going to have to become a little bit more consistent in doing it as a pro if he wants to reach his full potential. But I wouldn't spend a first round pick on him if we're just doing it based off talent. He's a second round type talent, in my opinion.
Wow, fascinating stuff there. So just one last question, then we'll let you go. Who are some of the other people in the football community whose work that you really appreciate and would recommend that others check out?
Oh man, that's a tough question. That puts me on the spot. I'm gonna have to say, I think I would say check everybody out. You know why I will say that? Take the easy way out. But here's what the reason why I say that, because I'm big on perspective. I have my method of looking at things, and people have their method, but it's always good to get a perspective that you're not used to seeing, because a lot of times we get caught up in the one way is the right way, which is your way, and that's completely wrong. And I've learned a lot from just sitting back and listening and reading other people's stuff. So I would say just view everyone, view a lot of people's writing, a lot of people's videos, podcasts, because at the end of the day, you're learning from their perspective, and then it may pique an interest in you to how to view something, and that's how I was able to become a little bit more well-versed in football. I thought I was always thinking from an offensive perspective until I really got immersed with a defensive coach and started to learn defense front and back, top to bottom, and became more inclined to, want to study defense first before offense, because I felt as though all I need to know was offense. So I would say read a lot of people's stuff and get that perspective.
Great point. And if you want to check out Emory's stuff, you can find that at Football Game Plan. Once again, Emory, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun. You take care.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Hey, John and Matt, this has been Murray, longtime listener of the podcast. Really enjoy the show, and I listen every week to hear your guys' tips and the great interviews that you have to come on. I had a question for you guys, and I was just curious how you go about evaluating dynasty trades in particular. And one aspect of that I'm curious about even is how you value draft picks as they're part of a trade, particularly if it involves like one player involved in that as well. So I'm just curious to hear your guys' opinions from things that are publicly out there to Rotoviz apps or some other items that you guys use. So thanks again for the time and for the opportunity to ask you a question.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So I guess my approach with it, typically it starts with looking at last week's guest, Ryan McDowell. He does this ADP data. And so I always look at that to try to get a sense for how players stack up against each other in Dynasty, what the market is currently valuing them. And so that's usually my go-to. As far as like picks versus picks, I think there are enough trade calculators out there that, are pretty helpful in understanding what that component of the equation looks like. Before I go any further, I want to toss it over to Matt to see if he has any thoughts.
Yeah, so obviously I like to look at different Dynasty ADP data that is out there, but in general I have kind of clear strategies that I like to use. One, I like to hoard picks. So if I can get a pick in a trade, even if it's just a small trade and I'm moving up a few picks in next year's draft, that's what I like to do. So whenever I can improve next year's draft position, that's almost always what I prefer to do. And if I can get extra picks so that eventually I can package those picks and move up higher, that's what I would like to do. And in any given trade, I try to trade away the known commodity, and I think the known commodity is normally like the older players. So, for instance, I would say almost everybody has a pretty clear idea of what Julio Jones, of what his value is, or an established player like him. But for the younger players, the guys who are rookies or have been in the league for only a year, I think there's much more uncertainty just like across dynasty leagues and what their values are. And so I feel that if I have an edge on a young player, if I believe he's got a strong chance of breaking out, but very few other people know about him, that's the type of player that I target. So not exactly answering the question, but in terms of just kind of strategies and players that I tend to target, I try to trade away the known commodities for the guys who have what I think is at the moment a depreciated value in comparison to what it might be in a year or two.
Yeah, and then one other thought that I have, Matt, and this kind of comes back to the ADP notion, is that I'll look and see where rookies are going comparatively in a dynasty. And so, for example, if I know that, let's say Devontae Parker is going to be the 5th pick in a rookie draft, I'll look at where he is and kind of use that as a proxy for what pick 5 is worth in terms of veteran players. And so I think that is, kind of a helpful way to at least get your bearings a little bit more on how to value on a one-to-one basis what rookies would look like next to, veterans.
Yeah. And John, one more thought on that. If you're in a long-time dynasty league, you have an idea of what picks are worth in terms of kind of past rookie players. Obviously, there's a great deal of diversity and skill from one rookie class to the next, but in general, kind of like a trend of like a decade or so. Not many dynasty leagues have been around that long, but you get an idea of like the value that you have in like the top 5 pick. Right. And where the 5th round starts to kind of tail off and when the 2nd round starts to tail off. And so I think just having an awareness of the past rookie drafts in which you've participated, that also gives you a strong sense of what type of pick you're willing to trade away and which type you aren't.
Thanks to Ben for that question. We hope that was a helpful answer. Every week, Matt and I do our best to help you become a better fantasy football player. If you're serious about your fantasy football and want to take your game to the next level, head over to rotoviz.com/radio, where you can get access to Rotoviz's articles and apps for a 30% discount. It's the same exact Rotoviz, but at a discounted price for you. It's our way of saying thanks for listening to the podcast. Once again, that's rotoviz.com/radio. Now, on with the show. In the wake of the NFL Combine, Matt and I wanted to run through the key skill positions, share a few observations from the weekend, and ultimately, try to help put a little bit of a ribbon on the Combine experience. So with that, let's start off with the running backs. Matt, the first guy that I want to talk about, his name is David Johnson from Northern Iowa. He destroyed the Combine. I mean, he, for the 3-cone, broad jump, vertical jump, was in the 86th plus percentiles on those. His speed score, which I'm not crazy about, but is a helpful metric. His speed score was fantastic. And then, you go to the college numbers, and he had 1,700 plus receiving yards for his career as a running back, on top of 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons to close his career. I am absolutely enthralled by what David Johnson did at the Combine. I'm working on an article right now, should be up by the time this hits the airwaves, Wow, what a performance. I mean, I'm almost like, I don't want to say that he's athletically similar to LaDainian Tomlinson, but I don't know how else to describe it. He just absolutely rocked this weekend.
Wow, that's a pretty big comparison. I think
Athletically.
yeah. I think LT had maybe a faster 40 time, but I mean both big guys who can move pretty quickly. So I mean I think it makes sense, and especially Johnson's ability as a receiver. I think that also mirrors what Tomlinson was able to do as a pro. One of the guys I was really, I wouldn't say impressed by, but interested by was Amir Abdullah. So I guess I was impressed by everything else except the 40 time. Um, Basically, Bishop Sankey numbers from last year, and Sankey destroyed the combine last year. Fantastic agility, great explosion, even a monster in the bench press, which was amazing for a guy who is only 205 pounds and really had bulked up to 205 pounds from like around 195 pounds as a senior. But one thing that is actually intriguing, I'm not the only person who noticed this. Lots of people noticed that as a group, the running backs had a very slow 40 time. And Fantasy Douche on Rotoviz has written an article about this, looking at kind of the correlation between broad jump and the vertical jump and 40 times. And it looks like there might have been something wrong with the recording systems for the 40 time, which I would say would give some credence to John's idea of let's just abandon the 40 time. But so Douche has kind of done an adjusted 40 time for Amir Abdullah based on how awesome his jumps were. And in this adjusted 40 time, he would have a 4.43 at 205 pounds, which is, very, very good. So I think Abdullah, for me, is a guy who won the combine. If you diminish a little bit his 40 time, that's official.
In a way, he almost kind of reminds me of Brandon Cooks from last year at the wide receiver position. Like, despite being a smaller guy, he was built very well and basically did everything he could have possibly done as a smaller running back to stand out and succeed in the drills.
Definitely, I agree.
Another guy for me, Matt, and would you say that it's fair that most people seem to be putting Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon in tier 1 and then like everyone else is in tier 2?
I think that's pretty fair as a general trend. I think that's fair.
Okay. Well, what caught my eye is that Jay Ajayi was almost identical to Melvin Gordon in these workouts. He's just a couple pounds heavier, so that, slows down a couple of his times by a fraction. But if you go over to Mock Draftable, our friend Marcus Armstrong has a great site there. The most similar player to Jay Ajayi, based on his physical comparisons, is Melvin Gordon. And when you look at a guy who has the only 1,700-yard rush, 500-yard receiving season in at least the last decade, maybe ever, I don't really know. I can't find anyone else that has one, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I don't know why Ajayi can't... I don't know why he's not being thought of almost as closer to Gordon and Gurley than he is to like the Tevin Coleman, Duke Johnson, that tier of players.
I agree. For me, there's no question that Ajayi and Abdullah are very good kind of like consolation prizes for the people who miss out on Gurley and Gordon. I think Ajayi has forte upside. He had a fantastic combine, good speed, as you mentioned, good agility for a guy his size, and of course he was prolific in college. I would love to get Ajayi in my dynasty drafts. Another guy that I would love to get, obviously not in Ajayi's class, but Zach Zenner, played at a lower level of college football, but was highly prolific. 3 straight seasons of 2,000 yards. He's a big guy, 223 pounds at the combine. He had good speed, good agility. He's a guy that teams have talked about as maybe a sort of tweener. Maybe he could play fullback, but I think he really is just a big running back who actually has better athleticism than people probably thought he would. So if he gets drafted, if he goes to a team that maybe has some uncertainty at the running back position, he would be a guy I would love to get late in the draft on my team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talk about being athletic for one's size or not. I'm going to call out Duke Johnson for what he did over the weekend. You know, he's a guy who I like his age production profile, but athletically, I'm just not quite seeing it. And, you know, I wonder if, I think 2 years ago, his injury shortened season was due to a broken ankle. I wonder if that didn't sap some of his athleticism, because ultimately what he checked in with was 207 pounds with a 4.54 40, 33.5-inch vertical, 121-inch broad. You know, basically positional averages or worse at a weight that was about 6-7 pounds less than the positional average. And then he skipped the agility drills. So, I mean, if you're going to be that size, not really have that exceptional of speed or explosive ability, you at least need to be agile. I mean, the three kind of classic examples, Gio Bernard, Frank Gore, and LaShawn McCoy. Similar builds, but they're super agile, 6.9 or less. The fact that Duke Johnson skipped it makes me think that he knew that his score was not going to be very good. And ultimately, it's just a huge bummer for a guy that was being talked about as in that second tier of running backs, maybe running back 4, running back 5 in this class. I'm struggling to see it in the wake of this weekend.
Totally agree. I was never really that big of a Duke Johnson fan to begin with, but now I'm really not that much of a Duke Johnson fan. So, we'll just have to see. Maybe he does the agility drills at his pro day, and he's awesome. We just have to see. But transitioning to wide receiver, a guy who you kind of mentioned athletic for his size, a guy who's smaller, Tyler Lockett. I really like him. He did fantastic at the combine. He didn't run in the 4.3s, but he ran a 4.4. He weighed 182 pounds. So he's smaller, but the 4.4 speed is just good enough, I think, for a guy who has that size. And then, of course, he was fantastic in the agility drills, pretty respectable in the jumps. I think he will probably be this year's version of John Brown or T.Y. Hilton. Maybe he'll even be drafted by Bruce Arians, but that not likely, because how many times can Bruce Arians draft a guy like that? But I think Tyler Lockett is a guy with sneaky 3rd or 4th round potential, who's obviously a great producer in college, and I think he has the athleticism to be productive in the NFL.
Yeah, Matt, for me, one receiver that caught my attention, but somehow managed to seem to not really get that much fuss, was Jalen Strong. He's a guy who I almost want to say that 3 to 4 years from now, he could be the best wide receiver from this class. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, and, I do love Amari Cooper, but, I mean, at 217 pounds to run a 4.44 40 with a 42-inch vertical, that's like Dante Moncrief, Julio Jones territory. As far as a weight, speed, vertical combination. He's was 20 years old in his final college season, had 35% of his team's receiving yards, was a strong touchdown producer in his time at ASU. I struggle to understand why he's not getting more top 3 wide receiver in this class buzz. Yes, Kevin White looked great. Devontae Parker, held his end of the bargain, but Jalen Strong is a forgotten man right now, and I don't get it.
I totally agree with you. In fact, it makes me think a lot of Jordan Matthews last year. Entering the combine, there were these questions about will he be athletic enough? What will his 40 time be? Jalen Strong had some of those same questions. Both guys came in weighing over 215 pounds. Both guys ran in the mid 4.4s. And then it seemed like no one really acknowledged that they answered those questions.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. Jalen Strong, he did what he had to do at the combine. I think he's definitely in that in that top tier of wide receivers, and I think there are a few of them up there. And again, just if you don't get Gurley or Gordon and you get Jay Ajayi, that's like a fantastic consolation prize. If you don't get Amari Cooper and you don't get Kevin White, I think Jalen Strong is basically just as good as those guys, except he's much cheaper. So I love that. A guy that I like is Nelson Aguilar. There's this sort of we talked about this on previous shows about the wide receivers from USC. And they come in big sizes, they come in small sizes, and no matter what the size, they basically suck. And but Nelson Aguilar, I think, is maybe like the USC Steve Smith version. Like he seems like the type of guy who could actually have success in the NFL. He's not a super small guy. I think he weighed 198 pounds, maybe 196, 198 pounds at the combine. He ran in the low 4.4s, so he's got good athleticism. And obviously he had good production at USC this last year. I think he's a guy who will go overlooked by a lot of dynasty players, but will be drafted in the 3rd or 4th round of the NFL draft.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why he is getting no buzz, and Marquise Lee, who had a fairly similar profile, got picked in the 40s overall last year. It seems weird to me, and I'm totally, I'm with you. I mean, ultimately, if I were to release rankings right now, I think he probably would be in kind of that Tyler Lockett area. I think, maybe a 3rd rounder, kind of 10th best in the class type of player. But it does seem weird. After kind of the big 5 or 6 in this class, he seems like he should be, in that conversation thereafter. Matt, one guy who literally jumped off the page, off the screen this weekend was Chris Conley from Georgia with a 45-inch vertical. 45-inch vertical, and he was weighing right around, 213 and a 4.35 40. So when I saw this, my thought was, okay, he's just this athletic specimen who's never really done anything, and, who really cares? I'm sure that, just this kind of guy is a needle in the haystack. But basically, when I went and actually looked at his production, I was pretty surprised. He, in this final college season, had about 25% of Georgia's receiving yards, which is his best season and isn't great, but it's still pretty good. And then for his career, I think he has about 1,900 or 2,000 career receiving yards and about 20 some touchdowns, which again caught me by surprise because I was not expecting that. I thought he was just an athletic freak but he actually has had production. And so, I mean, ultimately, we talked about where is Nelson Aguilar in this class. For me, I think once you get past that tier of Jalen, Amari, Kevin White, Devontae, and Dorial Green-Beckham, I don't know why Chris Conley couldn't at least be in the picture to be in that 6, 7, 8 kind of range in this wide receiver class. Almost like a Martavis Bryant, but better. And I think Bryant went in the 4th round last year.
Yeah, that feels a little bit high to me, but I mean, Martavis Bryant's draft selection also felt high to me, and he ended up having an awesome rookie campaign. So, I guess if some of these high upside guys who have kind of like hidden production that you pointed to, if they get drafted into the right position and they have the opportunity to play, if it's later in your draft, I think definitely it's worth taking a shot. And 2 guys who are kind of similar, although physically less upside, Devontae Davis and Ty Montgomery. Both of them came to the combine, like big guys, around 220 pounds. Both ran in the 4.5s. Neither of them is a great athlete, but both of these guys had seasons of good production, not their final season. And so I think both of these guys could be undervalued kind of in comparison to their peak production in college. I bet at least one of these guys will end up being drafted in that kind of James Jones range of like late 3rd round to maybe like 5th round, something like that. And I could see how, maybe there's some hidden like Marquise Colston potential in one of these guys.
And then shifting to the tight end position, I guess I'll start with an overarching comment. which is I'm livid that none of the tight ends did the 3-cone drill. Like, it's like they got through the workouts and were like, we've worked pretty hard today. I think we're just going to not do this one. And then, like, Mike Pope, the guy who was running a lot of the drills, just like, yeah, sure, no big deal. Just skip it. Like, how does that happen? Nobody from the tight end position did the 3-cone drill. How does that happen?
I have no idea, but I can tell that it affects you much more than it affects me.
Yeah. What do you got, Matt?
Well, the tight end I want to talk about is a guy who's a little bit under the radar at the tight end position. For a tight end, he had a decent 40 time, pretty decent raw stats, decent market share. And his name is Devin Funchess. Except he's small for a tight end. But in no way should this guy be a wide receiver. So, like, if you just look at the numbers, there are tight ends who have had numbers like his who have been successful. Like, that is basically what he is, except he's small for the position. But in no way is he a wide receiver. So I sort of cheated there. He's not technically a tight end, but that's the position he needs to play.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That crossed my mind over the weekend because he, like, if you compare him, for example, to like Eric Ebron or Jason Morrow from last year, a lot of his numbers will be pretty comparable to those guys, obviously a little bit smaller. But yeah, he does almost have like a tight end profile, kind of like how we like with Kelvin Benjamin last year debated, like, is he a tight end? Is he a wide receiver? Is he tight end? Is he like, it feels like the same kind of thing with Funchess this year of, like, depending on what lens you view him through, he could have very different, outlooks. Matt, for me at the tight end position, if I'm actually going to talk about a specific guy, I think Max Williams was the guy coming in to the combine that we were most curious about and maybe thought had the most potential. Ultimately, I think my verdict on it from checking out this weekend was just that it's just not a good tight end class. The one guy who I wasn't really that enthused about, but impressed me a little bit was Clive Walford. He and Max basically seemed to be pretty close to the same level, and then maybe a notch behind them was Jesse James. And ultimately, I don't think any of those guys is really that great. I look a couple years ago, I think it was the 2012 draft when Kobe Fleener was the first tight end picked at 34. I wouldn't be surprised to see Max and Clive go, maybe around pick 40 when all is said and done. What do you think about that?
This almost sounds weird, but I'm actually glad that Max Williams didn't have an outstanding combine because that means he's cheaper. I think he's still basically the same prospect that he was the week before the combine. I still think he had fantastic production. I think he has size and speed that is good enough for the position. It means that I have a better chance of getting him in my dynasty drafts. So I'm actually thrilled that the Max Williams hype train took a little bit of a beating this weekend.
Got it. Well, that concludes our combine review. Would love to hear some of your thoughts on the combine. If you want to hit us up on Twitter at Rotoviz Radio, let us know who some of the players that stood out to you were. And with that, we will keep on moving.